Okay, are you guys ready? Shh. Okay. Hardware. Multimedia and hardware. We've always been looking at, in every topic, software and hardware and the relationship between the two. But multimedia and these kinds of data have a very interesting relationship with hardware, and that's where we're going to look at it in particular. So maybe make a subheading or something like that. Multimedia and its relationship to hardware. Here's what I mean. Hardware, over the last, well actually, since forever we've had technology, right? Hardware advances, okay? Now hardware, as it gets better, and it's always getting better, hardware advances both in response to and as a result of multimedia advancing. Let me try and explain what I mean. Multimedia advances. Do you remember in that video we were looking at the history of animation? And he was talking about one of the new technologies that got introduced, which we take for granted now, which made the production of animation much quicker, right? Do you remember what it was?
The scanner.
Yeah, it was scanning, and the particular name they gave it was Xeroxing, right? Which was about mechanically transferring images, making copies and duplicates of them, right? So there was a hardware advance, okay? And what it led to was advances in the multimedia, right? The pictures looked, you could make more of them, it could be more advanced and so on, right? So a hardware advance took place, and that paved the way for a multimedia advance, okay? We'll talk about some other examples of this in a second. But it also works the other way. As multimedia gets more and more, we want it to be better, we want new features and that kind of thing, it pushes hardware developers to design their systems better. Okay? So a classic example of that is something like, say, Blu-ray, right? And DVDs before them, right? Blu-ray is a hardware advance, yeah? But I think where it came from was the multimedia advance, right? What kind of multimedia was advancing? Well, people wanted movies on big TVs, right? Well, they wanted it to look good on their big TVs. So they wanted high definition, really high quality sound. They wanted all kinds of special features on their movies, right? So multimedia was advancing, but all of those advances require more space, right? Lots and lots more space. Not just hundreds of megabytes, but gigabytes, right? So this advance also pushed back and made the hardware companies say, look, we need a new standard. We need to be able to cram more data into disks that are, the same size. Okay? So, let's think about, that was just a couple of basic examples. Let's think about the processors. You guys know the processors very well. And in particular, the hardware related to them and how they've advanced. Okay? So, you might like to put together a sort of basic table for yourself. Okay, and the columns that you want are the process, okay. The next one, how hardware is advanced. And the last one, how multimedia has advanced at the same time or as a result. There's 7 processes, right? And you remember what they are. We've got the mnemonic device for it. But I'm only going to look at 5 of them. You'll see why, hopefully, in a second. These 5 are the ones that relate most, okay? So where do we start? What's usually what we think of as the first process? Okay, collecting. Okay, now, how does hardware advance with regard to collecting multimedia? Okay? You can think of some examples, right? The most obvious example that comes to me is right in front of me, okay? I'm collecting video data, okay? So there's my multimedia form. and I'm collecting it, number one, in high definition. So this is high definition video, right? And number two, I'm collecting it in a very, very small format. In fact, I'm not really using a video camera, I'm just using a phone, right? Because it's just built in, okay? So not only have I got high quality, okay, which is actually, the video recording sensor is high quality, right? But also, it's very small form factor. So the actual cameras that you need to record quite decent quality stuff are now so small, they're with you all the time, they're very, very portable. Okay. So, what's the multimedia that's sort of resulted from all of this? Okay. Well, you've got this high quality video that everyone can take, right? So, high quality video is now no longer the arena of the professionals, right? Anyone can make their own high quality video, okay? So is common. You can just be an amateur, have very, very basic equipment, or at least basic according to today's standards, and produce some pretty good stuff. So there's how multimedia is advanced, and people are even making money off this kind of thing, okay? Let's move on. Let's have a look at a different process. I'm going to skip organizing and analyzing. I don't think they're as relevant to multimedia as the other processes we're going to have a look at. Okay? So for instance, storing and retrieving. Now I just gave you an example of this a second ago, right? So Blu-ray was one of my examples, but it's not the only one, right? For instance, I'm in the market for a new computer at the moment, and I'm just looking at what deals are out there. Okay? What would you say is an average size for a hard drive these days?
300 gigs.
300 gigs? Yeah? I actually think that's probably on the small end. I was looking at some of the basic models, and they're like 1 terabyte. And if you want more, you get 2 terabytes. Okay? Now, what's going on here? Storing and retrieving, what we mean is, we've got really, really large capacities. Things are huge. Hard drives now measure in the terabytes. And Blu-ray, actually, DVDs are 4.7 gig and Blu-rays are more than that, even more. Okay? Large capacities. And so you've also got not just, this is primary storage, right, we're talking about. That's primary, so things like a hard drive. There's also secondary storage though. Right? Sorry, this is, secondary storage. I think I got them swapped. Hard drive is secondary storage. Primary storage is actually RAM. In the same way, now, a really basic computer, I reckon, is what? 4 gigs of RAM? That's pretty normal, okay? First computer my family bought was called the Commodore 64. You know what the 64 stood for? It stood for 64, not megs of RAM, kilobytes of RAM. 64 kilobytes of RAM. We could do everything. We could play pretty cool video games in it, actually, okay? So things have advanced from there. Okay, I'm not that old, and yet the computers that I was using when I was your age were that much less advanced. Okay? Now, question. This is how the hardware is advancing. What about multimedia has forced or pushed that advance? You think about it? Okay, now that's interesting that you say that. Longer films, it would make sense if you had lots of longer films that you would need larger capacity devices. Okay? I'm going to suggest, on the whole, films are not really getting that much longer, right? Like, what's the longest film that you've been to? 3 hours, maybe? Like Lord of the Rings, extended cut might be like 3.5 hours, okay? Actually, you used to have movies like, say, Ben-Hur, right? That they were longer than that. They even had an intermission in the middle. Like, literally, you're watching, and then suddenly it goes, intermission, and you're meant to get up and go away, right, and have a break, okay? So I don't think, in general, movies are getting longer. What is it about movies that's requiring larger capacities? It's the quality, okay? So let's be really specific here. We've got increased resolution. So that's a visual thing, right? So for example, we talk about HD. We say, 720p, right? That's a measurement for how high the quality is. Or maybe 1080p. Okay? So increased resolution. Not just that, things don't just look better, they sound better as well, right? So you got things like, say, surround sound. Now, what does surround sound mean? It doesn't just mean you've got 1, 2 speakers, right? It means you've got speakers all around you. And the idea is that they're actually transmitting different things, okay? So sometimes when there's a sound that's meant to be at the front, you'll hear it up here, and sound at the back, it goes to different speakers, okay? So since you've got different data going to different speakers, that data takes up space, right? And that stuff's got to go somewhere, right? So you can see how the multimedia advance is fueling the capacity advance, right? And it also goes, vice versa. Now that, for example, when I was in year 12, I bought a digital camera. And this was back in the days when people, it wasn't very common. I think there's only 2 or 3 people in my grade who had one, right? And I had to buy a memory card to go in it. It was 128 megs. Do you know how much it cost me? 128 megs. That's what I think. It cost me $160. $160. So this was like a lot of savings for me, right? $160 on a 128 meg card. Now, these days, look at these things. Okay? Let me pull it off. These USB memory drives are each 4 gigs. Each 4 gigs, okay? Not only are they about a tenth of the size of what I got, but I think they were only, 10 or 15 bucks. 4 gigs. Now, let's just do the math. 4 gigs compared to 128 megs. How much more space have you got? 8. I think it's 32 times bigger. Just one. 32 times bigger. Cost roughly 1/6 or 1/8 of the cost. Okay? So it's getting bigger, it's getting cheaper. Now, what does that let you do? As this happens, right, I can now go out, and it's realistic for me, I can just shoot lots and lots of video. It's no problem, right? I'm not limited to my thing, which could take, woohoo, I got 30 seconds of video. I got to go back to my computer and upload it, and then I can go out and take some more, okay? So you see how they're sort of feeding off each other. That was that loop that we were talking about before. Okay, there's storing and retrieving. Pick me another process.
Transmitting and receiving.
All right, we will get to processing. Let's go transmitting and receiving. Now, what advances have happened in this particular process? Do you think about it? We're probably thinking about internet speed, right? Internet speed, okay? So we're talking about things like greater bandwidth, not just the fact that you can download more and you can download faster, right? But also, I would argue, you can do transmitting and receiving in more ways, can't you? You don't have to be tied down to a desk. How else might you get the internet? Mobile phones. I mean, even you guys are sitting at laptops right now. You don't have to be cabled in, okay? I remember the first time I was trying to set up a network at home. I had cables flying everywhere. My mum was tripping over everything. And then a few years later, we got our first laptop which had Wi-Fi built in. We turned it on, we flicked a few switches, and it's just internet. I'm not connected to anything. This is really weird, okay? And of course, for you guys, it's taken for granted. So we've got greater bandwidth. We've got mobile internet. And we've also got Wi-Fi, not only being widespread, but cheap. In fact, now, if you go in a lot of shopping centres, let me see, I think Castle Towers now offers free centre-wide Wi-Fi. Rouse Hill Town Centre. Really? Carlingford? There you go. I haven't been to Carlingford recently. I know Parramatta, a lot of McDonald's, they'll offer free Wi-Fi if you're nearby, right? They just give it out for free, okay? So there's a hardware advance with regard to transmitting and receiving, okay? Now, how is multimedia, how is that advanced in response, okay? On top of, we've already mentioned some before, right? All of these things, okay? If everything's bigger, you're going to need more bandwidth to download it, yeah? I remember once I used to download movie trailers. I wouldn't sit there and watch it over the course of 3 minutes, I'd get it start downloading, and then I'd go to sleep. And then tomorrow, maybe, it'll be finished, or maybe the day after, okay? But now, you don't just get high quality things, you get on-demand video. Or multimedia of all kinds, really, right? So things like, say, Spotify, okay, there you've got your audio, and of course, you got your YouTubes and your videos and all that kind of thing. So you could say on-demand, you could say streaming. Okay, you can say people are now, realistically, they're getting video, what we call over the air. So people have data plans, and they're just watching videos wherever they are, because they can, right? So there's a multimedia advance that's fueled by this, okay? And also vice versa, okay? You've also got things like, say, not just entertainment, right? But you've got teleconferencing, except we don't really call it teleconferencing anymore, right? We call it FaceTime, or Skype, or whatever, right? So this is also a means of multimedia that's being fueled by this and fueling it as well. As people increasingly use this, okay, all the networks are getting clogged up, and so there's pressure on network providers to say, look, we've got to move to off 3G, we've got to get to 4G, LTE, right? These advances are also happening in response to more people using these kinds of services, okay? Okay, I was transmitting and receiving. I think someone said before processing. Processing. Now this is a really simple one, really. What's the hardware advance that's happened with regard to this process?
Software. Oh wait, no, never mind.
High five! That was awesome. I wonder if that's going to come up on the record.
The stylus.
We mean processing, right? What's the main piece of hardware that deals with processing in a computer? It's called the CPU, right? So what we've got, because named after it, yeah, good work, is increased computing power. Right? Increased computing power. Not only are things like, say, clock speed increasing, now we measure in, gigahertz, not megahertz, okay? Clock speed's increasing, you're also getting more cores inside, right? So, Intel i5 Core Duo or whatever, okay? You've got more power in there. There's a proverbial saying that now, if you've got a phone in your pocket, almost certainly, I can basically guarantee, it has more computing power just built into that phone than the entire spaceship that got man on the moon. Apollo, which was the first Apollo? 11? They got on the moon, right? They had very, very diminutive systems that were actually running the spacecraft. Okay, partly because they had lots of power restrictions. But the fact that we've just got this in our pockets all the time is amazing. Okay? Now, watch out for this one. This one's tricky. What multimedia advances have pushed this and have been enabled by this? Okay? I'd say something like, say, not just the fact that you've got, bigger resolution, that kind of thing, but you've got, say, higher frame rates. What's a frame rate? Do you remember this? In video or animation, frame rate refers to how many individual images you see per second, right? And because they go by so quickly, they create the illusion of movement, yeah? Well, if you've got lots of images flying by, you need a CPU that's going to be processing all those images and getting them ready for display. Okay? Higher frame rates, things like compression. This goes with transmitting and receiving as well, right? But if you're going to compress a video so that it can be downloaded quickly, if it's compressed on one end, it's got to be decompressed on the other. And that requires computing power. Okay? So, compression, and a little thing called vector-based animation, which we're actually going to look at a bit later. So I'm just going to mention it now, and we'll deal with it in another lesson. Okay? Vector-based animation. We're almost there. What's the last process that we haven't mentioned yet? I skipped organizing and analyzing. It is displaying, which is usually the last one. Now, I've left it till last because I think it's the easiest. How has displaying technology changed over the last few years? We talked about some of them already. We kind of mentioned them. Okay. Yeah, we've got... now, Careful. I think the HD video is going to be over here. What's the actual hardware that corresponds to it? How big are your TVs? How big are your TVs? I was listening to my dad, who wanted to buy a replacement TV, and he was talking about how he was walking down the corridor and like the Good Guys or something, and he said, you know, you really need 50 inches as a minimum, I think, these days. Like any less, it just ruins the experience, right? And I just kind of smiled at him, okay? Because 50 inches, how big is 50 inches? It's not quite this big, okay? But it's pretty huge. Like, you got to sit back, because otherwise, if you're too close to it, you're sort of like, oh, where's the character going on the screen, okay? Because it's huge, right? 50 inches isn't the biggest. What's the biggest TV? Anyone see? Yeah, 80-inch, I've seen, okay? They're incredible, right? I myself just have a humble 32-inch at home. Is that about what people have? Yeah,
No.
Less? You got more than that.
When we have the smaller, the catalog range.
Yep, the square things. Yep.
Yeah, the square things. We enjoy them, we into them, but then when we got a new TV, we were like, oh, so
Yeah.
big, so big.
So, what do we got here? Large screens. And increasingly larger screens, right? We've got things like retina displays. Those pesky retina displays, right? I don't know if you've got a device that has a retina display on it, but when you go and say visit a website that's, low resolution, it looks awful. It's all blurry and that kind of thing. So what we're talking about here is pixel density. Pixel density is increasing dramatically, okay? And if pixel density is increasing, multimedia has to increase with it, and vice versa. We've also got, when you go to the movies, if it's an action movie, you don't just get to see it on a flat screen. Well, it is a flat screen, but you'll put on some glasses and you'll see 3D. Right now, 3D, as you remember, okay, it's not really 3D, it's double image. And it's sending two images to two different eyes. Now that takes up more data, right? So that's why there's hardware advances and multimedia advances that go with it. One last one, we've all actually mentioned it already, but we just haven't written it up here, okay? Displaying isn't just visual. There's other kinds of ways we can display data, such as audio, right? So I suppose the advance here would be things like surround sound. So 5.1. What does 5.1 mean? Your front speaker, main one, right? 2 satellites at the front, 2 satellites at the back. That's 5, and the 0.1 is like a subwoofer, so you get deep sound. Okay. Now they're all sending different things through. Okay. Now, tricky one. What's the multimedia reason that is pushed for all this? Why do we want all of this?
Enhanced experience.
Exactly right. It's usually because you just want a better entertainment experience. And on top of that, right, we want things to be as realistic as possible. If you see things like 3D video and surround sound, they're about realism, right? So we want increased realism when we go to see these things. Okay? So there you go. There's 5 of the 7 processors, I think the main ones. And that's a whole bunch of examples of how hardware advances and multimedia advances sort of feed off each other. Okay? Stop.